High up in the thin air of the Himalayas, a man once sat down on the trail, convinced he just needed a little rest. He never stood up again. No avalanche, no fall, no storm. His enemy was invisible. His body had simply run out of oxygen. And this is the terrifying reality of altitude sickness. It doesn't care if you're rich, poor, strong, weak, or the fittest athlete alive. The mountain can steal your breath away, quite literally, without warning. Every year, trekkers on Kilimanjaro and climbers on Everest collapse in perfect weather under clear skies in moments that should have been the highlight of their lives. Some never make it home. Doctors call it AMS, HACE, or HAPE. Climbers call it the silent killer. But the truth is, most of these tragedies could have been prevented. As mountaineer John Krakauer once said, the thin air takes everything out of you: strength, clarity, and sometimes life itself. That's what makes altitude sickness so cruel. It strips you down slowly, clouding your judgment until you don't even realize how much danger you're in. And yet, despite all this danger, thousands of people head for high mountains every year. Why? Maybe it's the view, maybe it's the glory, or maybe, let's be honest, some of us just enjoy paying thousands of dollars for headaches, nausea, and the world's coldest bathroom breaks. But behind the humor, there's a truth every climber has to face. You can't joke with altitude sickness. If you don't respect it, it will win. In this video, we're going to uncover exactly what altitude sickness is, the disasters it has caused, the science behind it, and most importantly, everything you can do to prevent it. Because whether you're trekking to Everest Base Camp, climbing at Kilimanjaro, or even dreaming of the world's tallest peaks, this knowledge could save your life. What is altitude sickness? When most people think of danger in the mountains, they imagine avalanches, rockfalls, or deadly storms. But the truth is, the most common threat isn't dramatic at all. It's invisible, silent, and hiding in every single breath you take above a certain height. And that threat is altitude sickness. At sea level, the air you breathe is rich and full. Every lungful feels effortless. But as you climb higher, something strange happens. The oxygen percentage in the air doesn't actually change. It's always about 21%. What changes is the pressure. The higher you go, the lower the pressure. And that means each breath you take contains fewer oxygen molecules. It's like trying to sip water from a straw with a hole in it. You're still drinking, but you're not getting nearly enough. By the time you're standing on the summit of Kilimanjaro, you're getting roughly half the oxygen your body is used to. At the top of Everest, only a third. No wonder climbers describe each step as feeling like a marathon. This lack of oxygen is what we call hypoxia, and hypoxia is the reason altitude sickness exists. Your body is designed for sea level. Suddenly put it in the sky, and it starts to panic. Altitude sickness actually comes in three forms. The mildest, and the one most people will experience, is acute mountain sickness, or AMS. Think of it as your body raising a warning flag. Headache, nausea, fatigue, maybe a bit of dizziness. It's uncomfortable but manageable if you pay attention. But if you ignore AMS, it can escalate into two far more dangerous conditions. The first is high altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE. That's when fluid builds up in your lungs, making every breath feel like you're drowning on dry land. The second is high altitude cerebral edema, or HACE, where fluid seeps into your brain, causing swelling. Victims often stumble around as if drunk, unable to walk straight, sometimes even laughing or acting confused, before collapsing entirely. Doctors can explain the science, but climbers know the simple truth. HAPE and HACE kill fast, and the only real treatment is to go down immediately. Altitude sickness doesn't discriminate. It strikes marathon runners and couch potatoes alike. You can't out-train it, you can't out-muscle it. The only defense is understanding what it is and respecting the mountain enough to prepare for it. Why altitude sickness is deadly. Altitude sickness is deadly not because it strikes suddenly, but because it sneaks up on you. At first it feels like a hangover, a headache, maybe some nausea, a little fatigue. But unlike a hangover, you can't just sleep this one off. The higher you go, the worse it gets. And the cruelest part? The very organ you rely on to make decisions, your brain, is the first to fail. As the oxygen thins, judgment slips. A climber who was once cautious and sharp suddenly becomes reckless, confused, even stubborn. Many disasters in the high mountains begin with someone saying, "I'm fine, I can keep going," when in reality, their brain is already starved of oxygen. Poor choices pile on top of exhaustion, and soon, what should have been a manageable situation spirals into catastrophe. This is why mountaineers fear the so-called death zone above 8,000 meters. Up there, no matter how strong or experienced you are, the human body simply can't survive for long. Cells starve, muscles weaken, and every step feels like carrying weights through water. Doctors warn that staying more than 48 hours in that altitude, even with bottled oxygen, pushes the body into a fight it cannot win. History is filled with chilling reminders of how quickly altitude can kill. On Everest, a place called Rainbow Valley is littered with the bodies of climbers who ignored the warning signs. Brightly colored jackets and gear still cling to their remains, frozen in time, silent teachers of a lesson paid in blood. They weren't all inexperienced adventurers. Some were among the best climbers in the world, yet even they could not outsmart the simple math of oxygen. On Kilimanjaro, it's common to see trekkers on summit day collapse in exhaustion or confusion, sometimes needing evacuation by stretcher or helicopter. Many of these cases start as mild headaches just a day earlier. It doesn't take a storm or a fall to end the climb, just the invisible enemy of thin air. As John Krakauer once put it, the thin air takes everything out of you: strength, clarity, and sometimes life itself. That's why altitude sickness is so feared, because unlike avalanches or rockfalls, you can't see it coming. You only feel it when it's already too late. How common is it? If altitude sickness sounds rare, some freak accident that happens to a handful of unlucky climbers, think again. The reality is that it's almost guaranteed to show up once you climb high enough. Studies show that nearly everyone who ascends quickly to around 3,500 meters will feel some symptoms. That means even on the Everest Base Camp trek, where the goal isn't even a summit, mild altitude sickness is practically expected. Headaches, sleepless nights, and loss of appetite are just part of the deal. On Kilimanjaro, it's even more striking. The mountain is marketed as a walk-up, a peak that doesn't require technical skills. And yet, roughly 3 out of 4 trekkers report some form of altitude sickness during their climb. That's thousands of people every single year, all fighting the same invisible battle against thin air. What's surprising is that physical fitness doesn't give you immunity. You can be a marathon runner or a weekend hiker, the mountain doesn't care. Altitude sickness has humbled the toughest athletes and spared people who barely trained. It's unpredictable, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Think about that for a moment. The very thing that makes mountains like Kilimanjaro and Everest Base Camp so attractive. Their accessibility to ordinary people is also what makes them dangerous. Thousands of first-time adventurers set off each year, many with no real understanding of what altitude can do. For some, the only symptom is a mild headache. For others, it's a helicopter evacuation. One trekking company once joked that altitude sickness is like the world's worst lottery. Except here, you don't win money, you win nausea, dizziness, or worse, and there's no way to predict your ticket until you climb. That's why every climber, whether they're headed for Everest or just their first high-altitude trek, has to assume it will happen to them. Not if, but when. And the difference between a story you laugh about later and a tragedy carved into the mountain's memory is how you handle those symptoms when they come. Prevention. How to outsmart the mountain. If altitude sickness is unpredictable, you might wonder, is there anything we can actually do to stop it? The answer is yes, and the golden rule is simple. Go slow. The body can adapt to thin air, but it needs time. Doctors call this acclimatization. It's why experienced climbers repeat the mantra, climb high, sleep low. You push up to a higher point during the day, then descend to sleep at a lower altitude, giving your body a chance to catch up. Guidelines from high-altitude medicine are clear. Once above 3,000 meters, your sleeping altitude should rise by no more than about 300 to 500 meters per night. Every 1,000 meters or so, you should take a rest day. It feels frustrating when you're eager to push for the summit, but patience here isn't wasted time. It's survival time. Hydration is another pillar. Dehydration mimics many of the same symptoms as altitude sickness: headache, fatigue, dizziness. If you're not drinking enough water, you're setting yourself up for a confusing and dangerous situation. Combine that with the fact that cold, dry air at altitude dehydrates you faster, and the mountain becomes a giant desert in disguise. Food matters too. At altitude, your body burns through calories at a crazy rate. This is not the time to worry about dieting or counting carbs. In fact, climbers are encouraged to eat more carbohydrates because they require less oxygen for your body to turn into energy. In other words, that big bowl of pasta at base camp isn't just comfort food, it's fuel for survival. Then there are the avoidables: alcohol, smoking, and sleeping pills. All of them interfere with breathing and recovery. Having a celebratory beer at 4,000 meters may sound fun, but you're basically handing altitude sickness an invitation. Finally, medication. The most well-known is acetazolamide, better known as Diamox. It helps the body adapt by increasing breathing and speeding up acclimatization. Some climbers swear by it, others don't like the side effects, but one thing is clear: no pill replaces the need to go slow. As Dr. Peter Hackett, a leading altitude medicine expert, likes to remind climbers, the only cure for altitude illness is descent. The bottom line? The mountain is patient. If you're patient too, you dramatically increase your chances of standing on the summit and making it back down to tell the story. Real stories and disasters. Mountains are filled with cautionary tales of climbers who underestimated altitude sickness. Take the story of Babuchiri Sherpa, one of the strongest high-altitude climbers in history. In 1999, he set a record by surviving 21 hours in Everest's death zone without oxygen, an almost superhuman feat, but that's the exception. For most, spending even a fraction of that time above 8,000 meters without support would mean certain death. His story shows both the power of adaptation and the razor-thin line between survival and disaster. Then there are the stories that don't end with records, but with tragedy. On Everest, a young climber once ignored mild headaches and nausea, convinced it was nothing more than dehydration. And within 2 days, it escalated into high-altitude cerebral edema. He collapsed near Camp 3, disoriented and unable to walk. Despite frantic efforts to get him down, the mountain claimed him. His teammates later admitted they all saw the symptoms, but no one spoke up soon enough. Even on Kilimanjaro, far below the death zone, trekkers have collapsed from altitude sickness. Rescue teams regularly carry climbers down who thought a little headache wasn't a big deal. For many, the first warning sign is also the last. The so-called easy mountain proves again and again that no peak above 5,000 meters is ever truly easy. Perhaps the most haunting example lies on Everest slopes, Rainbow Valley. It's not a colorful meadow, but a stretch littered with the bodies of climbers who died in the death zone. Their brightly colored jackets, frozen forever into the landscape, gave the place its name. These are not faceless statistics. They are men and women who once dreamed of standing on the highest point on Earth. Many succumb not to storms or avalanches, but to altitude itself. The cruel twist is how quickly altitude sickness can flip the story. A climber who looks strong at breakfast might be incoherent by nightfall. A trekker laughing with friends one day might be in a helicopter the next. The thin air doesn't negotiate, and it doesn't forgive hesitation. These stories aren't meant to scare you away from the mountains. They're meant to remind you that altitude sickness is not a theoretical danger. It's real, it's deadly, and it has written countless names into the history of the Himalayas and beyond. Respecting it isn't paranoia, it's the price of survival. The body at altitude. Climbing a mountain is often described as a battle with the elements. The cold, the wind, the terrain. But the fiercest battle is actually happening inside your own body. From the moment you step above the comfort of sea level, your body begins a desperate race to adapt. The first response is simple. You breathe faster. It's why newcomers to high altitude often feel like they're panting after just a few steps. The body's trying to drag in more oxygen, even if each breath carries less than normal. Then your heart joins the struggle, pumping faster to move what oxygen there is around your body. If you stay longer, something extraordinary happens. Your body starts producing more red blood cells. These tiny carriers act like oxygen delivery trucks, transporting precious molecules to every organ and muscle. It's a brilliant adaptation, but there's a cost. Too many red blood cells make your blood thicker, forcing your heart to work harder. It's like changing from pumping water through a hose to pushing syrup. Even with all these adjustments, there are limits. The brain, which is especially sensitive to oxygen levels, starts to misfire. Concentration fades, judgment blurs, and coordination begins to fail. That's why haste victims often stumble or slur their words before collapsing. It isn't clumsiness, it's a brain starving for oxygen. The lungs face their own crisis. In severe cases, fluid leaks into the air sacs, a condition known as HAPE. Imagine trying to breathe with your lungs slowly filling with water. Each breath becomes shallower, tighter, until even lying still feels like suffocation. And the cruelest truth of all, there is no way to completely conquer altitude. Above about 8,000 meters, acclimatization becomes impossible. No amount of training or biology can save you from the slow decline. Mountaineer Welly Steck once said, "At altitude, you're never really in control. The mountain decides if you go up or not." That's the sobering reality. The body can adapt, but only so far. Beyond that line, survival is measured in hours, not days. The deadly mistakes you must avoid. One of the greatest dangers in the mountains isn't just altitude sickness itself, it's the mistakes people make when facing it. And the first mistake is trying to hide the symptoms. Countless climbers have ignored their headaches, dizziness, or nausea because they didn't want to look weak or slow down the team. Some even keep quiet out of pride, thinking they can push through. The truth? Hiding symptoms is one of the fastest ways to end up on a stretcher, or worse. Another deadly habit is reaching for painkillers to mask the warning signs. On Kilimanjaro, guides warn again and again, don't just pop paracetamol or ibuprofen to silence your headache. Those pills might dull the pain, but they also blind you to the reality that your body is failing to cope with the altitude. Climbers have pushed higher on nothing more than false confidence, only to collapse hours later with full-blown HACE or HAPE. And then there's summit fever, the desperate urge to keep climbing, no matter what your body tells you. Rushing the ascent, skipping acclimatization days, or chasing a tight schedule is tempting. After all, you've spent so much time and money to get there, but mountains don't care about your budget or your vacation days. If you move too fast, the mountain will punish you. Nutrition and hydration are another trap. At altitude, food often tastes bland, your appetite vanishes, and water feels like a chore to drink. But skipping meals or ignoring hydration weakens your body exactly when it needs strength the most. Think of it this way. If your body is already struggling to breathe, don't make it wage a second war against hunger and dehydration. Then there are the bad companions of altitude: alcohol, smoking, and sleeping pills. Alcohol and cigarettes make it harder for your blood to carry oxygen, while sleeping pills can slow your breathing when you need it most. Having a beer at 4,000 meters might sound like a victory toast, but in reality, it's more like giving altitude sickness a helping hand. Finally, the biggest mistake of all: refusing to descend. Time and again, climbers have gambled on pushing higher despite worsening symptoms, only to pay the ultimate price. As Dr. Peter Hackett once said, the only cure for altitude illness is descent. It's not weakness to turn back, it's survival, and the mountain will always be there for another try. Final advice for trekkers and climbers: if there's one lesson that echoes across every mountain range in the world, it's this: respect altitude. You can train for years, buy the best gear, and hire the best guides, but none of that will protect you if you ignore the signals your body sends. The climbers who make it home aren't always the strongest or the fastest, they're the ones who listen. When you're in the mountains, there are 3 rules to carry with you. First, listen to your body. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Second, ascend slowly. The mountain isn't going anywhere. Give your body time to adapt. And third, descend if sick. No summit, no view, no bragging rights are worth your life. The path down may bruise your ego, but it saves your lungs, your brain, and your heart. Even Sherpas, whose bodies are genetically adapted to high altitude, are not immune to these dangers. If altitude sickness can affect them, it can affect anyone. That's why humility is as important on a climb as crampons or boots. The mountain doesn't reward pride, it punishes it. In the end, the real achievement isn't standing on the summit. It's standing back at the bottom, alive, with stories to tell and memories to share. Altitude sickness doesn't care about how much money you spent, how hard you trained, or how badly you want the summit. But if you respect the rules, prepare properly, and know when to turn back, the mountains may just let you pass. As one climber once joked, the goal isn't to climb the mountain. The goal is to get back down so you can complain about how bad the food was at base camp. Behind the humor lies the truth. Survival is the real victory. Altitude sickness is the great equalizer of the mountains. It doesn't care about your age, wealth, or fitness. It only cares about one thing: oxygen. And in the high places of the earth, oxygen is a currency that runs out faster than you think. We've seen how it begins with a simple headache and can end with tragedy. How even the strongest climbers have fallen victim, and how the simplest rules, patience, honesty, and respect, can make the difference between life and death. So if you dream of standing on Kilimanjaro, trekking to Everest Base Camp, or even aiming for the great giants like K2 or Everest itself, remember this: the mountain will always be there. Your life might not if you gamble with altitude. George Mallory once gave the most famous reason for climbing mountains: because it's there. But the reason to come back alive is simpler: because the people you love are here. Respect the altitude, climb smart, and may your story be one you get to tell, not one told about you.